My family gave every other grandchild piles of gifts at Christmas and left my kids empty-handed while laughing at their tears. So I walked out and weeks later exposed the fraud my brother-in-law thought he'd hidden from everyone. My brother-in-law Prescott called me 13 times in 4 minutes. My mother started sobbing so hard her words came out in pieces. My sister Delia screamed a single question into my voicemail. Not, how could you not? What is wrong with you? Just what did you do? I sat in my dark kitchen at 10:47 p.m. on Christmas night with my children asleep upstairs and a 2-inch thick federal investigation file spread across the table in front of me. And I looked at that question on my screen for a long time. What did you do? Like I was the one who had done something. I almost typed back the truth, almost told her exactly what I'd spent 6 months building. Document by document, LLC by LLC, forged signature by forged signature in an office 17 floors above the street while she was at charity luncheons and spa weekends and annual Christmas parties where she made sure my daughter's lap stayed empty while every cousin in the room drowned in wrapping paper. I didn't type anything. I just smiled at my phone in the dark. You smile when a long story finally finds its ending. Then I went upstairs, checked on my kids, watched them breathe, and I went to bed knowing that by noon the next day, Prescott Hale's name would be on a federal subpoena. But I need to tell you how we got there because the Christmas party was not the beginning. It was just the moment I finally stopped pretending the beginning hadn't happened. My name is Elena Marrow. I'm 38 years old. I run a forensic financial investigation firm called Marrow and Associates out of a downtown office I built from nothing after my marriage ended. And my family spent approximately 4 months being gracious about it before deciding that a divorced woman with 2 kids and no husband was a specific kind of problem they didn't know how to categorize. My daughter is Ren. She's 8. She has her father's jaw and my stubbornness and a laugh that sounds like it comes from somewhere older than she is. My son is Theo. He's 11. He reads everything, feels everything, and has spent the last 2 years developing a quiet toughness that breaks my heart precisely because I know where he learned it. We had been attending the Marrow family Christmas for their entire lives. My parents, Garrett and Sylvie Marrow, live in a colonial on the north side of the city that has been the site of every significant family gathering I can remember. Garrett is a retired structural engineer who still conducts himself like a man running a meeting. Sylvie is the kind of mother who records everything on her camera and then edits which memories she keeps. My sister Delia is 42, impeccably assembled and married to Prescott Hale, who runs the regional operations division of a pharmaceutical research foundation called Ventris Group. Prescott Hale, remember that name. Delia and Prescott have one son, Beckett, 13, who has his father's confidence and his mother's talent for cruelty, and who had been making low-level comments about Ren and Theo's clothes, their school, their apartment, their lack of a father at home for approximately 3 years before Christmas. I had been noticing it, telling myself it was kids being kids, telling myself Delia would correct it if it got bad enough. The first time I realized I was wrong about that was Thanksgiving 2022, when Beckett told Theo that his shoes were the kind poor kids wear, and Delia from 4 feet away said nothing, not a word. She reached past Beckett for a dinner roll and kept talking to my mother about a renovation. I took Delia aside afterward, told her Beckett needed to be corrected. She looked at me with the particular patience she reserved for situations she'd already decided weren't her problem. "He's a kid, Elena. Don't make everything a federal case." That was the phrase she used, federal case. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind and didn't think about it again for months. The second time I realized I was wrong was Easter 2023, when my mother handed Beckett and Delia's other guests elaborate Easter baskets and handed Ren and Theo each a $5 bill in an envelope. Ren held hers and looked at the basket Beckett was already pulling candy from, and then looked at the envelope and then looked at me with those 8-year-old eyes that are still learning how to hide what they feel. I told her the basket was for bigger families and ours was just the right size, and she nodded because she's 8 and she trusts me, and I wanted to put my head through a wall. That night I drove home in silence with 2 quiet children, and I told myself it was nothing, that Sylvie had miscounted, that it was an accident. It wasn't an accident. The third time I realized I was wrong was October, when I ran into my cousin Bridget at a coffee shop, and she mentioned casually, the way people mention things they assume you already know, that Delia had been telling the family for 2 years that I was struggling financially after the divorce, that she'd told my parents I was barely keeping the firm afloat, that she'd told Garrett and Sylvie the children needed stability they weren't getting. I set my coffee cup down very carefully. She said, "What Bridget went quiet, in the way people go quiet when they realize they've said something they can't take back." My firm had grossed $2.3 million the previous fiscal year. I drove a paid-off Volvo. Ren and Theo went to a private school I paid for in full every September. I was not struggling. I had never been struggling. But in Sylvie and Garrett's version of reality, carefully maintained and regularly updated by Delia, I was the cautionary tale. The cautionary tale doesn't get the Easter basket. I didn't confront Delia about it, not then. I had something bigger coming, because 4 months before Christmas in August, I had been retained by a federal oversight body to conduct a forensic audit of the Ventris Group Pharmaceutical Research Fund. And within 6 weeks of starting that audit, I had found Prescott Hale's fingerprints on $4.2 million that should not have moved the way it moved. I want to be precise about this because precision is my entire profession. The Ventris Group managed a research fund designated for clinical trial oversight. The money came from a combination of private endowment and federal grant allocation, which meant the moment it was misused, it crossed a line from civil fraud into federal criminal territory. My job initially was simply to assess whether the fund's internal controls were adequate. They were not even close. What I found instead was a pattern so methodical it had a kind of ugly elegance to it. 3 LLCs incorporated in different states 18 months apart, each one registered under a variation of Delia Hale's name. Delia A, Hale D, Adair Hale. Adair Hale Consulting. Vendor approval signatures on contracts worth $800,000 that when I pulled the originals had been forged. Good forgeries, but forgeries. Money flowing from the research fund into the LLCs, then dispersed to a constellation of smaller accounts before being reinvested in real property. And the real property, one piece of it, was a retirement property registered in my father Garrett Marrow's name used as collateral in a transaction he had signed without I was nearly certain understanding what he was signing. I sat with that piece for 2 weeks before I could think about it clearly. My father had been used his signature, his property, his trust folded into Prescott's architecture without his full comprehension. Garrett is 71 years old and trusts documents put in front of him by people he loves. Prescott had known that, had used it. In October, I did something I would later question. I went to Delia privately before any of it became official, before the subpoenas were drafted, or the federal team was fully assembled. I sat across from my sister in a coffee shop 2 miles from her house, and I told her as clearly and plainly as I knew how that Prescott was in serious trouble and that she needed to get him an attorney immediately. She looked at me across the table for a long moment, then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a disbelieving laugh, a real one, full from the chest, the laugh of a woman who has just heard something she considers beneath her. "You're jealous," she said. "You've always been jealous that Prescott actually made something of himself. You're going to manufacture some little investigation so you can feel relevant." I looked at my sister. "Delia, I'm trying to protect you. Your name is on 3 LLCs that are going to appear in a federal case. My name is on business structures my husband manages. That's completely normal. Not when those structures are vehicles for fraud." She picked up her bag, stood up. "I'm done with this conversation. And honestly, Elena, get some help. The divorce made you bitter, and it's starting to affect how you see everything." She walked out. I sat there for a moment, very still, and then I paid for both coffees and drove back to my office and called my lead investigator, a former IRS special agent named Thomas Vega, who had 22 years of financial crimes experience and the disposition of a man who found everything mildly interesting and nothing particularly surprising. She didn't bite, I told him. No, he said they never do. We moved forward. Tomas had been building the evidentiary chain alongside me since September. He was meticulous in the particular way that people who have testified in federal court dozens of times are meticulous. Everything dated, everything sourced, every piece of documentation in a chain of custody that an opposing attorney would spend months trying to break and fail. He'd pulled the original LLC filings, cross-referenced vendor approval dates against internal calendar records showing Prescott out of the state, and traced 4 bank transfers through 2 jurisdictions. Our contact on the federal side was Special Agent Rosamund Achebe of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, 12 years based downtown. A woman who communicated almost entirely in 2-sentence emails and showed up to meetings with a legal pad and no water bottle and left having said exactly what needed to be said and nothing else. She had been assigned to the Ventris case in September, after a parallel investigation by the Department of Health and Human Services flagged the research fund irregularities through their own audit process. Rosamund and I had worked alongside each other twice before. She knew my methodology. She trusted my documentation. When I brought her the full package in November, LLC's forged signatures, transaction records, the collateral property tied to my father, she read it for 40 minutes without speaking. Then she said, "When do you want the subpoenas?" I told her I needed until after the new year, that I had some personal business to sort through first. She gave me a look that said she found that interesting without saying so, and wrote something on her legal pad, and that was that. I had the timeline, I had the documentation, I had a federal agent with 12 years in financial crimes who believed in the case, and then my family had Christmas. The party was at my parents' house as always. We arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Wren in a green velvet dress she had picked out herself, Theo in a button-down he'd actually ironed me in something presentable that Delia would find a reason to comment on. Prescott met us at the door with the smile he wore at events, wide, performative, slightly too long in duration. The living room was arranged the way it always was. Presents piled under the tree, organized by family group. The Collins cousins, Delia's nickname for Beckett's social cluster, which had always struck me as odd since no one in the family is named Collins, in a loose circle near the fireplace. My parents moving between the kitchen and the dining room with the particular busyness of people who know exactly what's about to happen and have decided not to interfere. I saw the presents before Wren did. There were gifts in every corner of that room, labeled bags and ribboned boxes organized by name. I scanned the piles the way I scan spreadsheets, looking for the anomaly, the outlier, the thing that doesn't fit. My children's names were not on a single package. I told myself I was wrong, that I'd missed something. I told myself Sylvie had organized them differently this year, that they were in another room, that I was being paranoid in the specific way that comes from having been professionally suspicious of things for 11 years. I was not being paranoid. At 5:30, Sylvie announced it was time to open gifts. She did it with the camera already raised, already recording. Beckett tore into the first box, a gaming setup, the kind that runs $400, and the room erupted. Other cousins followed. Paper everywhere, laughter, Sylvie moving through the chaos with the camera narrating. Wren sat in her chair. She looked at the floor, then at the other kids, then at her own empty lap. Theo sat next to her and put his hand on her arm and stared at a fixed point in the middle distance with the particular expression of an 11-year-old who has decided that crying in front of these people is not something he will do. Beckett caught them watching. He is 13 and he has his father's instincts, which means he knows exactly when he has an audience. He looked directly at my children. "Guess they didn't earn anything this year," he said. The room kept moving, kept laughing, kept pouring wine. My mother lowered her camera, not in alarm, not in correction. She lowered it in the specific way that means you've just captured what you wanted and you're satisfied. "Well," she said, calm, unhurried Sunday morning, calm. Some children make their grandparents proud. Wren's face broke apart, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way 8-year-olds fall apart when they're trying so hard not to, that the effort itself becomes the collapse. Her jaw trembled, her eyes filled. She turned away from the room so that no one could see her, which meant she turned toward me, and I watched my daughter try to disappear inside herself at her grandmother's dining room table on Christmas. Something went very still in my chest, not hot cold, the kind of cold that doesn't leave. I stood up slowly. I picked up Wren's coat from the back of her chair, held out my hand to Theo. He took it without hesitation. Delia saw me from across the table. She smiled, that particular smile, the one she has been perfecting for 30 years, the one she brings out for moments she has decided she has won. "You forgot something," I said. "Did we?" she said. Beckett threw wrapping paper in the air. "Maybe next year they'll deserve it." My father looked up from the head of the table. "Elena, don't make a scene." "You already made one," I said. Delia leaned back in her chair like she was watching something she'd expected and found mildly entertaining. "You're seriously upset over presents?" I looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm upset because you enjoyed it." Nobody had an answer for that. Garrett made a sound, a scoff, the sound of a man who has decided any discomfort in the room is his daughter's fault, and turned back to his wine. I took my children out. We drove for 20 minutes without talking. The heat running full blast, and Wren had stopped crying, and Theo had his head against the window watching the streetlights pass. My hands were steady on the wheel. I was aware of that, how steady they were, how still I felt. Then Theo's voice came from the back seat, very quiet. "Mom, did we do something wrong?" I pulled the car over, put it in park, turned around and looked at my son and my daughter in the back seat. "No," I said. "You did nothing wrong." Wren wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Then why do they hate us?" I didn't answer because the real answer was that they didn't hate my children. They didn't think about my children enough to hate them. They had made my children props in a performance about hierarchy and belonging and who gets to feel like they matter. Wren and Theo were the negative space in the picture. Their emptiness made the other's fullness more visible, more satisfying. You can't have a have-not without somebody who doesn't have. I couldn't explain that to an 8-year-old. I also couldn't explain that the man who had hosted that party was going to wake up in 2 weeks to a federal subpoena with his name on it. I took them home, made hot chocolate, put them to bed, kissed their foreheads in the dark. Ren grabbed my hand before I could leave her room and held it for a moment and then let go, the way she does when she's deciding to be okay. I went downstairs to the dark kitchen. The federal case file was in a locked bag in my home office. I didn't get it. I didn't need it. I had every detail of it memorized in the way you memorize something you've lived inside for 6 months. I opened the family group chat on my phone, typed, "Don't ever invite us again. We are not your joke. Your gift is already on the way." Sent it. Put my phone face down on the table, counted to 3. The phone started vibrating before I got to 2. Prescott called first 6 times in a row, then my mother crying, then Delia not crying, screaming a single word into my voicemail over and over in different configurations. "What did you do? What did you do?" My father called once, left a message in the formal tone he uses for things he considers administrative. "Elena, I would appreciate a call back at your earliest convenience." This appears to have caused some confusion. 32 missed calls, 19 texts, 4 voicemails, and 1 message from Prescott separate from the calls sent from his personal number at 11:04 p.m. What gift? I looked at those 2 words in the dark for a long time. He was scared. The message had quality of a man trying to sound casual and arriving at something that sounds like an open window on a high floor. I typed nothing back. I went to bed. In the morning, I dropped Ren and Theo at school, drove downtown, parked in my usual spot, and took the elevator to the 17th floor. My assistant, a perceptive young woman named Cora Bright, who had been with me for 3 years and communicated mostly in clean efficiency, and the occasional devastating observation, handed me a thick envelope the moment the elevator doors opened. "Courier dropped this at 8:15, she said. "Rosamond DeChabe's office sent it." I carried it to my desk, sat down, opened it. Federal subpoenas signed by a federal magistrate judge the previous afternoon. Prescott Elliott Hale, Delia Adair Hale, and 3 named LLCs. Finalized, executed, legal, beautiful. Tomas appeared in my doorway at 9 a.m. with 2 coffees. He set one on my desk and looked at the envelope. "Day of," he said. "Day of," I confirmed. He nodded like a man ticking something off a list he's had in his head for a while, picked up his coffee, and went back to his office. At 11:47 a.m., I was reviewing secondary documentation when Cora's voice came through the intercom. "There's a man downstairs who says he needs to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment. He says his name is Prescott Hale and that it's urgent." I told her to let him up. He came through my office door looking like a man who had not slept and had spent the hours he might have used for sleep trying to find an angle that worked and arriving at none of them. His coat was expensive Loro Piana charcoal, the kind of coat that costs more than most people's monthly rent, and he was sweating through it in December, which was its own kind of information. He looked around my office at the wall of credentials at the filing system at the view. "This is your firm," he said, "has been for 7 years. He sat down across from me without being invited to, which was a habit of his I had always found informative. "What did you do?" he said. "I sent a message." I said. "You threatened my family." "No," I said. "You threatened your family the moment you started stealing from a federal research fund and registered the vehicles in your wife's name." His face changed, not dramatically, a subtle drop in the architecture around his eyes. The specific shift of a man who has been operating on the hope that the person across the table has less than they appear to have, has just realized that hope was wrong. "You don't have proof," he said. I almost felt something not quite sorry, more like the particular feeling of watching a chess piece fall that you've been moving into position for a long time. 3 LLCs under Delia's name, I said. Forged vendor approval signatures on contracts totaling $817,000. I had a forensic document examiner named Dr. Callum Reyes, 14 years in question. Document examination qualified expert in 4 federal jurisdictions. Authenticate the originals against Prescott Hale's known signature samples. The forgeries are competent, but distinguishable at the 3rd stroke analysis level. I paused. And then there's the collateral. Something shifted in his face. "My father's retirement property," I said, "used as collateral in a transaction he signed without understanding what he was signing." I have the original document. I have his deposition statement taken 6 weeks ago by Thomas Vega, a former IRS special agent with 22 years in financial crimes, in which my father confirms he did not receive a plain language explanation of what he was authorizing. Prescott stood up. "If this goes public," he said, "everyone gets destroyed." "Delia, your parents, My father is a cooperating witness, I said. He was defrauded. He's protected. Elena, you picked the wrong woman to underestimate Prescott. He reached for my arm across the desk. I removed his hand with the particular precision of someone who has been doing this for a long time and finds it neither frightening nor particularly interesting. He left. At 2:15 p.m., Special Agent Rosamund Ackerby and 3 members of her team executed search warrants at the Ventress Group's regional offices. Employees poured into the street. Someone who had been in the building at the time called a local news station. The first news van arrived at 2:52 p.m. By 6 p.m., the story was on every major outlet. Local executive under federal investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud. Ventress Group Research Fund at center of alleged embezzlement scheme. I read the articles at my desk with Cora watching over my shoulder, the two of us quiet. Buried at the bottom of the 4th paragraph of the 3rd article, under a section describing the investigation's origins, was a single line. Lead forensic consultant on the case, Elena Marrow, founder of Marrow & Associates. Cora was quiet for a moment. They called you the divorced daughter at Easter, she said. She'd heard the Easter story when I came back to the office that April in a particular mood. They did, I said. How does that feel? I thought about Wren's face, the way it broke apart quietly, the way Theo grabbed her hand and stared at the floor because he was 11 years old and had decided he wouldn't let them see him cry. It feels like enough, I said. My phone lit up. Delia, my mother, Garrett, cousins, family, friends. The screen filled up the way it had the night before. A cascade of names I'd known my whole life, all of them suddenly needing something from me. I watched it for a moment. Then I saw a notification from a number I didn't have saved. A text sent at 6:34 p.m. that read, "They're not the only ones who used your children. You need to see what I found." I set my phone down, read the message again. The number was local. The phrasing was specific. Not "I have information" or "call me," but used "your children," which was a particular choice of words that didn't feel like phishing. I forwarded it to Thomas. He replied in 4 minutes. "I'll run the number. Don't respond yet." In 40 minutes, he had a name: Ferris Adler, 49 years old, former internal auditor at the Ventress Group. Resigned 14 months ago before I had been retained before any of this became official. I stared at that timeline, an internal auditor who resigned 14 months ago, who had my private number, which I had not given to anyone at Ventress Group, and which was not listed publicly, who had waited until the day of the search warrants to reach out, who had watched this long and carefully and chosen this exact moment. I called Rosamund Achabe. She answered on the second ring. "Ferris Adler," I said. A pause brief, just long enough. "We've been looking for him," she said. "The next 72 hours are still partially under seal, so I'll tell you what I can." Ferris Adler had been the one who first discovered the shell companies. He had brought it to Ventress Group's internal compliance board 14 months ago. They had quietly terminated him instead of acting on it, a story so familiar in financial crime cases that Tomas had made an audible sound when I described it, somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. Adler had kept everything, every document he'd flagged, every email he'd sent to compliance, every response he'd received. He'd been waiting for an official investigation he could bring it to safely. And the moment he saw Rosamund Achabe's team walking into the Ventress offices, he knew it had arrived. The phrase "used your children" in the text was not metaphorical. Among Adler's documents was an email chain from 16 months ago between Prescott and a member of the Ventress board discussing the pending forensic audit that the federal oversight body had been considering launching. Prescott's concern, expressed in writing, was that a named investigator, me, Elena Marrow, named specifically, was likely to be retained if the audit moved forward. He described me as problematic. He noted in the same email thread firm was navigating a difficult post-divorce financial period and that my credibility as an investigator could be proactively undermined if the right people communicated the right things to the audit selection committee. He had been feeding my family the story that I was struggling. Garrett and Sylvie, and through them Delia, and through Delia the whole family. It hadn't started with Delia's jealousy or my mother's particular way of categorizing daughters. It had started with Prescott, who needed me discredited and who had found the softest possible entry point. My mother's pride and my father's worry and my sister's willingness to believe the worst of me. He had used my family's dynamics as a weapon, and my family, without understanding they were a weapon, had pointed themselves at my children. I read Adler's documents in my office at 11 p.m. on the night the warrants were executed. Tomas sat across from me. Cora had gone home hours ago. My hands were completely still. Tomas looked at me across the desk. "You knew something was off," he said. "That's why you went private with Delia in October." I thought it was family. I didn't think it was architecture. It was both, he said. He was right. It was both. Prescott had taken a pre-existing structure, my family's hierarchy, my mother's camera that captured the grandchildren who made her proud, my sister's fundamental belief that I was the lesser version of her, and he had loaded it and aimed it. He hadn't built the weapon. He'd just found it sitting there and used it. That's its own kind of horror. Prescott Elliott Hale was indicted on 7 counts of federal wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, and 2 counts of filing fraudulent financial instruments. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial date is pending. Delia was not charged. Her name on the LLCs was as my investigation had concluded the result of Prescott's actions rather than her own direct participation. She knew nothing about the shell companies which I had told Rosamond from the beginning and which the evidence supported. This did not make her feel better about me. She has not spoken to me since the warrants. I am at peace with that which surprised me when I discovered I was. My father Garrett's retirement property was secured from the transaction through his cooperation as a witness. He called me 3 weeks after the indictment. We talked for 40 minutes. He cried in the way men his generation cry briefly, almost silently, and then it's gone and he never mentions it again. He said he was sorry. I believed him. Sylvie has not called. I think about Beckett, sometimes 13 years old, watching his father be led out of a news cycle, learning that the man he was modeling himself after was a fraud. There's nothing satisfying about that part. There's just a kid who deserved better parents than he got, which is its own kind of loss. Ren and Theo know that Prescott is in legal trouble. I explained it in the way you explain these things to children, carefully, age-appropriately, with the truth at the center. Ren asked me if we could still go to Grandma Sylvie's for Christmas next year. I told her we'd something better, something that was just ours. She thought about that, like what she said. I don't know yet, I said. We'll invent it. She seemed genuinely satisfied with that, which is the thing about Ren. She takes the future seriously. She believes in it. Theo is the same way in his quieter fashion. It's March now, 4 months since Christmas. My firm just closed a significant consulting contract with a regional bank holding company. Tomas got a commendation from Rosamond Achebe's division. Cora got a raise she didn't ask for but absolutely earned. Ferris Adler is a protected cooperating witness and has, I'm told, returned to work in financial compliance at a firm in another state. I wear my credentials quietly. I always have. I don't talk about the work at family dinners. I don't name drop case types or client categories or the specific grinding methodical labor of taking a financial crime apart thread by thread until it confesses. I have never needed the room to know what I was dramatic Elena, the divorced daughter they pitied, the one who never quite fit the family picture. I didn't need them to know, but they know now. They've always underestimated me. I used to wish they wouldn't. Now I know that what looked like a disadvantage was just a longer runway. You let me build the whole case before you remembered I existed. That was your first mistake. The second was Ren's face on Christmas. You don't get to make that face happen and call me dramatic. I don't need you to apologize. I don't need the seat back at the table. I just needed you to finally understand something that was always true. I am not the lesser daughter. I never was.